And finally, in this week's Third Opinion, I want to talk about what seems to be a long-forgotten principle: respect in the public square. Let me just get straight to the point. The free press is broken, and if we don't fix it soon, and very soon, America may end up broken as well. Our sole job here in the media, as originally defined, is to arm the American public with the facts required so that you can make up your own mind. That's it. That's the whole job. And yet most days, many Americans turn on the news believing that the people who show up on their television are lying to them. In the very first episode of this show, I quoted the author Helen Keller, who wrote, "A well-educated mind will always have more questions than answers." Well, somewhere along the way, a growing chorus of voices in the media decided that many of the questions from the public were undeserving of answers. Not because the questions themselves are unreasonable, but because the media stopped respecting the people who were doing the asking.
You know, the credulous boomer Rube demo that backs Donald Trump, that wants to think that Donald Trump's the smart one, and y'all elitists are dumb.
You elitists with your geography and your maps and your spelling.
There it is. Well, you cannot describe vast swaths of the public as cretins and morons and expect them to believe you actually care about them.
Win an election, but to win it by enough to chase, at least for a moment, Trump and the maggots off the stage.
Maggots. He's talking about you. You see, the media still can't understand how after 4 years of their nonstop declarations that Donald Trump was a treasonous existential threat to humanity, he actually secured 10 million more votes than he did the first time he ran. The media still can't comprehend how after calling President Trump a white nationalist in chief for 4 years, he secured the highest percentage of minority support in the modern history of the Republican Party. But the answer is clear to anyone actually paying attention. These voters don't believe them anymore. Because at the end of the day, a free press only works if the people believe that the press will respect and report on their concerns. In tort and criminal law, there is a principle known as the reasonable man doctrine. It is the notion that as a matter of course, we should apply a baseline standard to which the average person should be judged to have a reasonable response. Now, today, a large part of the breakdown we face in media is the erosion of reasonableness between those who report the news and the audience it is actually responsible to inform. It is reasonable for average Americans to be confused about a media apparatus that calls their lockdown protest at church a crime against humanity and yet says their neighbor's flash mob celebration of Joe Biden with thousands of strangers is an acceptable risk. It is reasonable for people to be confused when the media says unequivocally voter fraud does not exist and yet calls them ruse for suggesting otherwise when we just watched the state of North Carolina forced to hold a brand new congressional election less than 2 years ago when a Republican consultant for Mark Harris was allegedly caught harvesting ballots illegally.
I told him that collecting ballots was a felony. I think that they made mistakes in this process, and they certainly did things differently than I would have done them.
That was Mark Harris weeping as his own son testified that a consultant on his father's campaign attempted to rig the election by illegally harvesting absentee ballots. Now, to be clear, that does not mean that we are a nation of cheaters or that rampant voter fraud has kneecapped our democracy. But when the same media that actually reports on the fraud and abuse of absentee ballots turns around and ridicules citizens for suggesting that fraud and abuse of absentee ballots is even possible, you shouldn't be confused as to why millions of Americans have changed the channel, or worse, tuned out completely. Look, the media has force-fed society 4 years of nonstop reporting about foreign threats to our democracy from Russia to Iran, and now they are condemning everyday Americans for raising concerns that our elections may not be secure. The media insisted that President Trump's entire margin of victory in 2016 was due to Russian interference. And now they're confused as to why millions of Americans are apoplectic that Twitter blocked the New York Post account while they were actually sharing real news. That, my friends, is not reasonable or respectful. And ironically, even the CEO of Twitter Jack Dorsey himself, who upheld this embargo, now says it was a mistake. In the end, as the saying goes, love is learned, trust is earned. But the love and trust required to sustain American democracy is not possible without renewed mutual respect between the press and the people they are supposed to serve. Without it, we're just a rudderless republic, drifting away from the pillars that have always made America strong.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.